Imagine this. You're on set, cameras are rolling, the lights are hot, and then something goes wrong. An accident, a delay, a sudden death. At first it seems like bad luck, but then it happens again and again. Different years, different people, same story. Every one of these cursed productions has one thing in common. They're all trying to adapt The Master and Margarita. This novel has been called unfilmable, untouchable, even dangerous. People have spent decades trying to bring it to the screen. Almost none of them succeed, and when they do, things get weird. Really weird. Now, I've known about The Master and Margarita my whole life. Growing up in Russia, you just do. But the more I learned about the strange history behind its adaptations, the more I started to wonder, is it just bad luck? Or is there something in the story itself, something dark, that doesn't want to be filmed? Now, before we jump in, and of course this is if you want to do it, and if you don't want to do it, don't. But if you enjoy this type of content, theories, breakdowns, deep dives, and just overthinking TV shows and movies, I would greatly appreciate the support. If you could like, comment, subscribe, and share this video, it would mean a lot. You guys know the spiel, but it really does help the channel grow. With that being said, we're talking about what The Master and Margarita is really about and what's been happening on the sets of those who've tried to bring it to life. Because maybe, just maybe, some stories don't want to be told.
В реальной жизни никакого Воланда не существует.
Поверьте, он существует.
Before we get into what people call the Bulgakov curse, let's talk about what this novel is actually about. The novel takes place in two timelines. The main timeline is set in the 1930s Moscow, where a mysterious man named Voland arrives in the city. He introduces himself as a foreign professor, but it becomes clear pretty quickly that he's the devil. He doesn't come alone. His company includes Behemoth, Koroviev, Azazela, and Hela. As soon as they arrive, strange things start happening. People vanish, some go insane, greedy bureaucrats and self-important officials are publicly humiliated or ruined. The targets, however, are never random. It's always people abusing their positions, lying to survive, or buying into the system too fully. Voland isn't just causing chaos, he's exposing what the Soviet system rewards: hypocrisy, cowardice, and moral compromise. Alongside this, there's a second narrative, a reimagining of the trial of Yeshua, a version of Jesus, and the Roman governor Pontius Pilate. Pilate is portrayed as this intelligent man who is paralyzed by fear, not of Yeshua, but of the consequences of showing mercy. He knows Yeshua is innocent. He even feels a strange connection to him, but in the end, he gives the order to execute him to protect his own status and security. Then there's the third narrative, the story of The Master and Margarita, which is also set in Moscow during the 1930s. The Master is a writer living in Moscow. He spent years working on a novel about Pontius Pilate, but once it's finished, things go bad fast. The literary establishment rejects it. Critics tear it apart. The pressure gets to him, not just the professional failure, but the deeper fear that telling this kind of story in his political climate might cost him more than just his career. Eventually, he burns the manuscript and checks himself into a psychiatric clinic. Margarita, his lover, is still out there, and she hasn't given up on him or the book. She's not part of the literary world, she's not famous, but she's fierce and loyal, and still believes the Master's novel matters. When Voland's company reaches out to her, offering a way to reunite with the Master, she says yes. What follows is one of the most surreal and unforgettable parts of the book, the Devil's Spring Ball. Margarita is transformed. She's given a magical ointment that makes her invisible, lets her fly, and leads her into a night of pure supernatural chaos. She becomes the hostess of the ball, greeting a long line of damned souls and historical murderers as they rise from the underworld. But it's not a punishment. She's not seduced or ruined. Margarita holds onto her sense of self through it all, and when Voland offers her a reward, she doesn't ask for power or wealth or even freedom for herself. First, she asks for mercy to free a woman from eternal suffering. Then, she asks to be reunited with the Master. She gets both, and in the end, the two of them are given peace. Not heaven exactly, but a quiet afterlife together, away from the madness they try to survive. Now, all three storylines, Moscow, Ancient Jerusalem, and the personal arc of the Master and Margarita, are connected. The Master's book about Pontius Pilate mirrors the novel we're reading. The characters cross between worlds, and at the center of it all is Voland. Not as a tempter, he's not trying to seduce people, but as kind of a judge. He punishes hypocrisy, but also grants mercy. He doesn't destroy Margarita or the Master, he helps them. That's part of what makes the novel so difficult to genre categorize. It's not just satire, it's not just political, it's also theological, surreal, and in a way it feels deeply personal to Bulgakov. And it's exactly this complexity that has made it nearly impossible to adapt this novel. Something always seems to go wrong, which brings us to the so-called Bulgakov curse.
Дьявол, в которого никто не верит, решает лично посетить Москву. Он бы навел порядок.
Now, to really get where this whole curse idea comes from, we have to start with Mikhail Bulgakov himself and the time he was living in.
Everyone in that country is supposed to follow those steps, right? You're part of the deal. If you're not part of the deal, you're against the deal.
Bulgakov started working on The Master and Margarita in 1928, right in the middle of one of the most repressive periods in the Soviet Union's history.
And this is a picture that shows, again, Joseph Stalin and his high-ranking officials in his kind of circle in the first picture, right? And in the second picture, the person on the right is retouched, right? Pre-Photoshop, this is all done by hand. You know, photographs of people would first appear in public life, right? Newspapers and so forth. And then as those people fell out of favor or were, killed by the regime, those people would start to disappear from public records.
By the 1930s, Stalin's regime was fully in control, and things were brutal. And that is just a simple way of putting it. Censorship was everywhere. Writers were expected to follow the rules of socialist realism. Basically, stories had to glorify the Soviet state. If you stepped out of line, you could be banned, blacklisted, or worse. And it wasn't just the writers, it was everyone. People were disappearing, some were arrested, some just stopped showing up to work.
If you're a writer or an artist or a prominent cultural worker of any kind, you're always under a kind of a threat, right? For having done something for which you would be accused, anti-Soviet propaganda or whatever. Your friend could have written something on you and say, I didn't like Michael, I could have written something to the president and the president would have dispatched him.
Bulgakov didn't exactly play it safe, too. A lot of his work was banned or heavily censored, and at one point in 1930, he got so frustrated he actually wrote a letter directly to the Soviet government, saying he couldn't keep working under those conditions, and if they weren't going to let him publish, maybe they should just let him leave the country. The letter ended up on Stalin's desk, and strangely enough, Stalin didn't have him arrested. Instead, he let him keep working, but only at the Moscow Art Theater, and always under watch. So, Bulgakov was allowed to write, but barely. The kind of creative freedom he needed, he never really got. He kept working on The Master and Margarita anyway, in secret, rewriting and revising it over and over until his death in 1940. He unfortunately never saw it published. His wife Yelena is the one who kept the manuscript safe, and she's the reason we have the book at all today. It wasn't officially published until decades later, long after Bulgakov was gone. So even from the start, the novel was caught up in suffering, secrecy, and struggle. And then came the adaptations.
So it's a really kind of a countercultural book, if you will. It's a book not loved by everybody, but it's a book, I think, well loved by those who don't abide by the main kind of rules that you're told you're supposed to live by. by those in power.
Now here's where things start to feel off. In the theater world, there's a superstition. Never say Macbeth inside a theater. It's believed to bring misfortune. But in the film world, it seems The Master and Margarita has its own version of bad luck. Almost every attempt to bring Mikhail Bulgakov's masterpiece to the screen has faced serious and sometimes tragic problems. Now let's start with the first adaptation. Now shortly after the novel's censored publication in the Moskva magazine, a 15-minute student film was directed by Svetlana Druzhinina at the Gerasimov Institute of Cinematography. The film focused on Sokov, who was the manager of the buffet in the theater, and his encounter with Voland. It was screened once before, but both existing copies were lost. This early adaptation is noted for its chaotic production, including the casting for 3 different actresses for the role of Hela. Then, in 1989, Roman Polanski was approached by Warner Bros. To adapt the novel. Polanski collaborated with John Brownjohn on a screenplay that reimagined The Master and Margarita as neighbors, with Margarita portrayed as a young music teacher. Despite initial enthusiasm, the project never came to happen. Warner Brothers deemed the satire on Soviet absurdity less relevant after the fall of the Berlin Wall, leading Polanski to move on. Then we have the adaptation of 2005 by Vladimir Bartko. Now, he directed a 10-part TV series that aired in Russia in 2005, closely following the novel's text. The series was a massive success, but was followed by the deaths of several cast and crew members, leading to rumors of a curse. Now, some of these deaths include Alexander Chaban, who played investigator Sidorov. Chaban was found dead in his apartment shortly before the premiere. Yevgeny Merkuriev, who drowned in a fishing accident. Kirill Lavrov, who died of leukemia. Stanislav Landgraf, who died of a heart attack. Valery Zolotukhin, who lost his son to suicide during production and later died of a brain tumor. And finally, Alexander Abdulov, who died of lung cancer. In total, over a dozen key individuals associated with the series died in the years following of its release. Then there's the adaptation, or shall I say the attempt of an adaptation by Baz Luhrmann, the director behind films like Moulin Rouge and The Great Gatsby. His version never made it to the screen.
But I basically spent all my time running away from it. Now, what I mean by that is various people had the rights, and people were always coming up to me saying I've got the rights to Master Margarita, or you know, only you can make it. Or I remember I was at a book signing in New York once, and some slightly scary man grabs me and he grabs my hand and he goes, "You're making Master and Margarita?" And I was like, well, I'm thinking about it. And he said, "You will hear from me." As he turned over, I could see he had a wolf head tattooed on his wrist. I mean, I really got to keep away from that Master Margarita. This cannot be good.
In the end, he dropped out and the adaptation was abandoned. And the most recent adaptation is by Michael Lockshin. He directed an adaptation which was initially called Voland, later retitled to The Master and Margarita. Filmed in 2021, the movie faced political challenges when Lockshin publicly criticized Russia's invasion of Ukraine. His name was removed from promotional materials and the release was delayed multiple times due to political tension, funding issues, and technical setbacks. The film finally premiered on January 25th, 2024.
I mean, there were attempts throughout 2022 to kind of either take me off the movie, censor the movie. The producers just didn't know if they could even finish the movie with me. And they're definitely, as I said, originally we had artistic freedom, but by this time, a lot of the themes in the movie became tabooed in Russia.
But it didn't stop with Lockshin. Plenty of other directors, both before and after, tried to bring The Master and Margarita to light and faced their own share of challenges. Some projects just kind of fizzled out quietly. Others ran into major obstacles, from funding issues to politics to plain old bad timing. And one of the most notable names in this long line of attempts is Andrei Tarkovsky. He considered adapting the novel but couldn't get approval. L.M. Klimov almost launched a version with Columbia Pictures, but Perestroika-era challenges and budget demands halted the project. Yuri Kara completed the film but was shelved due to copyright disputes and only released in 2011. Scott Steindroff acquired the rights for a Hollywood version. The project collapsed due to rights disputes and changing geopolitical climates, and this list goes on and on. Now, beyond the real-world tragedies and setbacks, there's still this lingering question. Is the novel itself the problem? The Master and Margarita is filled with supernatural events. Some believe the story taps into something deeper, something volatile, maybe spiritual, maybe cultural, but whatever it is, it doesn't seem to like being filmed. So whether you think the Bulgakov curse is real, or just a long streak of weird coincidences, one thing's for sure, something always seems to go wrong when people try to bring this book to the screen. Now what about you, my dear viewer? Have you read The Master and Margarita or seen any of the adaptations? Do you think the curse is real, or is it just one of those stories that's too strange, too layered to ever work on film? I personally have to say that I would have loved an adaptation from Tarkovsky or Baz Luhrmann, but let me know what you guys think. Also, would you be interested in a deep dive into the history of the Macbeth superstition? Let me know in the comments down below. I want to thank everyone who took the time of day to watch or listen to this video. And now remember, the important thing is to never stop questioning, even me. Till next time.